Okay, shall I start?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, good. Well, good evening to all of you. I'm speaking from Singapore. It's morning here, exactly 12 hours ahead of you. And so it's for me Friday morning. I am very happy to be meeting you all online and very happy that you're all excited about serving students. So my training today and for the next 9 sessions will be essentially ISM training. If you haven't got familiar with the acronym, it's International Students Ministry. But Belinda and I know that, and we've just talking about it, that this is really not just for students. What I'm going to teach you is actually what I say, portable. I use the word portable. It is, you can carry it into another area of ministry, such as multicultural ministry. Okay, so I have asked Belinda to send you the slides, and we're going to put it also on the chat so you can refer to it. But I'm going to be giving you this screen live. Okay, so today we are doing session 1. And session 1, before we begin, I want to say a few things. As I mentioned early on, what I'm teaching is scalable and portable. Portable means you can carry this to some other area of ministry and it would be totally relevant. Scalable, it's in something you can do in a small way and you can do it on a mega church way. If one of you is leading a mega church and you want to do this, it's fine. If you're only leading 10 people, that's fine too. So this is scalable and portable. And so do not be overwhelmed as I talk over the next 10 sessions that, oh, wow, this is just so much to learn, so much to do. I think I am scared and I'm not going to do it. Okay, so do not be overwhelmed by the scale of work or the numbers that we need to reach. In many cities and, you know, in many small towns, maybe there's only one ISM worker and he or she is just struggling along. And this is something that I hope is going to help you too. So it doesn't matter if you don't have the numbers. I think if you learn what I teach you, you will find that you can do it even if you're just one person. And so essentially, you just look at the gifts and the resources you have and use what you have from God. And then you use it faithfully and you take what God gives to you. What I mean is this, I have been involved in some churches where we started off, we prayed, and then we said, yeah, we have got a lot of students nearby. We're going to reach out to them. And I'm going to tell you in 3 situations what happened. In the first situation, I call it KVKR. This was a ministry that my church tried to start in Singapore, and we are near the National University of Singapore, and it's National University of Singapore. For those of you who know Singapore, it's in a place called Kent Ridge, and of course that's the top of the hill, and the bottom of the hill is Kent Valley. So Kent Valley was where the faculty lived. Kent Valley and Kent Ridge was where the students studied. So we called the ministry KVKR and we thought students were coming. And you know what? The first iteration we tried, the people who, and we organized ESL lessons, English as a standard, English as a second language. And we thought that a lot of students would come and improve their English. And guess what? The ones who came were parents, mothers of the children who were studying in Singapore. So we ended up, you know, in Chinese, those of you who can speak Mandarin, pay to mama, the mother comes along with the child, and the child is busy in school, the mother comes for ESL. So we ended up with a pay to mama ministry. So we tried again and said, okay, we should send out more invitations and get the students involved. And this time round, the second iteration, we ended up with a lot of foreign exchange students. For some reason, maybe the first few people were foreign students who are on exchange in Singapore. So we ended up with a ministry to foreign exchange students in the National University of Singapore. Not quite international students, because they were there for only like one semester or 1 year at the most, and then they left. So yeah, we tried hard and we just didn't get the people we wanted. But whatever it is, be faithful, reach out to the mothers who come, reach out to the foreign exchange students who come, and just keep on trying. So um, and we called that outreach actually Octopus, because it was like the tentacles of the obstacles, the octopus. And basically, because my church is so well placed in Singapore, it is within reach of 8 different tertiary institutions. So we're really blessed. But Singapore is a small place. You're in a much bigger country. Maybe all you have is like the nearest campus is 10 miles away. It's okay. God will send whoever he sends to you. And then Mint PC is yet another story of how in the People's Church in Toronto, I reached out to international students. And essentially what we got were not truly university students. Okay, they are university age. Many of them on a gap year. So they are from Japan, they're from Korea, China, and they're in Toronto for a year or two doing what is called working holiday. So they have a visa to work, and they have a visa that allows them to do any studies they want within the 1 year they are in Canada. So that was a working holiday visa, and we ended up reaching out to a lot of students in the way they are still students, but on a working holiday. We did have some college students from Seneca College and University of York, University of Toronto, and so on. Yeah, but it became largely working holiday students. So it's okay. Whoever God sends to you, just minister to them faithfully. And if it's just you end up with new immigrants, and that's all you have, that is fine. And the skills I teach you would be portable, applicable to them. The key message I'm going to give you is that we are going to demonstrate God's love, agape love, which is unconditional love. And for the students, for the people you minister to, it is really sincere, because you have no conditions imposed on them. You don't expect any return from them. You don't even care about if they appreciate you or not, whether they return the love to you or not. So that's unconditional love, because remember, God loved us so much that he sent his son to die for us, and to die for us even while we were still sinners, while we were still enemies of God. So Romans is something that we bear in mind as we reach out to sometimes even people who are totally ungrateful and totally unappreciative of what you're doing. I once gave a talk. I was invited to give a talk to a college, and they wanted to hear, wise words from me. So they said, we have a bunch of 12th graders. They're going to graduate, give them some wisdom. So I gave a talk entitled How to Eat an Elephant. This is a very strange title. How do you eat an elephant? Well, a little bit at a time. So when you have a big, enormous, ginormous project, and you say, oh, this is so hard, it is so big, what do I do? Well, take it one step at a time, a little bit at a time. Where international students are concerned, where new immigrants are concerned, a lot of people are going to Canada. A lot of people are ripe for the harvest. This is a field where I would say the fruit is overripe, not just ripe, but it's overripe. Particularly with students. Students, you see, they are vulnerable, okay, especially for many of them, if they're 18, 19 years old, they're leaving the countries for the first time in their lives, leaving their parents far, far away. So they are vulnerable to a lot of danger. If they're not careful, they could end up with drugs. If they're not careful, they could be shot in the back of the head. If they're not careful, they could be, less dangerous, but still dangerous enough spiritually. The cults get them. And there are, of course, lots of crooks out there to get them. So in Toronto, I do stay in touch with the news, and the Globe and Mail recently had this expose article on how there's a very high suicide rate among Punjabi students in Brampton and Toronto. And why? Because they are from Punjab in India. They are very poor, and they look at coming to Canada as a way of changing their lives for good, forever. So they come to study and they try to get work, and whatever they earn is much, much more than they can earn in Punjab. They are children of farmers and peasants and so on, right? So they save up a lot of money. Maybe it's the money not just of the family, but the extended family, maybe even the whole village. They're pulled in the resources to send this little Punjabi student to Brampton, Mississauga, Toronto, and they get cheated. They get, exposed to drugs. Their lives are gone. And they're so desperate, they're so depressed, they take their own lives. So it's a very wicked world out there. Many of my students will come to me. In fact, we are not the first people to reach out to them. They will tell me of experiences with the Mormons, with the Jehovah's Witnesses, with the other cults, and so on. So yeah, let's protect them. And the opportunities that you're facing in Canada right now, the government is pushing for a lot of immigrants and a lot of international students because they bring money and they bring talent and they bring a lot of future for Canada, because many of them would stay. Now, this question I face with many pastors. And when I come to this point, I said they would go home. And then the pastors might say, so why do we want to reach them? They are going home. We never see them in our churches again. And we're going to spend all the resources for nothing. I hope you don't think that way, because many of you have come from churches that are very mission-minded. You send missionaries over to all parts of the world. So look at this as you are sending missionaries back to their own countries. A student who comes to Christ in Toronto goes back to Punjab, goes back to Shandong, goes back to a little village in Sri Lanka, and they're going to be very good missionaries because they speak the local language and they have local friends. Versus you send your own church member, she's Cantonese and she has never spoken Punjabi in her life, and she has to maybe spend 3 years, 4 years learning Punjabi. She goes over there and her Punjabi is kindergarten grade because she learned it as an adult. Why do we do all that and spend all that money when you could just send a student home and he is or she is going to be a very good missionary, native speaker? So things like that. But actually, there's a reverse question. It's one of the people I talked to, and she's a pastor, and she says, why do I want, she's mission minded. So she says, I want to reach international students so they go home with the gospel. And I find that, and she's from Toronto, right? And I find that many of them stay in Toronto, so I wasted my effort. So her perspective is the reverse. And I said, oh, no. If they stay, and I think about 40% might stay, 40, depending on the ethnic group, the nationality. I always tell people, in my knowledge, the Japanese almost all go home. The Japanese, the Koreans mostly go home. The Chinese mostly stay. So yeah, so you just look at who comes, and if they stay, they become members of your church and they enrich your church, because these are very clever young people from different countries around the world. So these are the things that I want you to remember as you say, God, I am ready to serve where you want me to serve. And if it's international students or new immigrants, let it be so. Now, where the students are concerned, many of them come, if they come to college or even in high school, they come from places where there is a lot of discouragement. Poverty, economy is not growing. Japan, for example, has been 30, 40 years in depression, a recession. They have not got out of it. So many of my Japanese students, they are very disgusted and disillusioned with life. And there is something called the millennial disillusionment. You know, these students coming, they are born in the 80s and the 90s, and they are what we call the millennials. They are a very hard bunch to reach, many people would say, because they don't care about church. They see that all these pastors, they talk big, but they have thoroughly immoral lives. They're greedy and they grab money and they buy big mansions for themselves. So the millennials are very disgusted because they say the world isn't going where it's going, and church is supposed to be good people, but they are the worst. So they're very discouraged. When they come to Toronto, they are leaving their countries in disillusionment, some of them, or they come hoping that there will be some ways they can educate themselves to change the world. So they're willing to try alternatives, and they look at Western ways as modern ways, and they want to learn as much as possible from the West, Canada being in the West. So one of the alternatives, of course, would be Christ. Christianity is an alternative to the belief systems they have, the religions they have, and they're willing to try. Maybe, there's something in this that I don't know about. They come from far away. They no longer have peers and family and society to pressure them. So they are free to try what they want to try, including drugs and alcohol. I had a Japanese student who came, and his father was very strict. And of course, in Toronto, for the first time, he was free of his father's clutches. And one day he got so drunk, so drunk, he was actually subject to alcohol poisoning. Okay, he was actually not just intoxicated, he was poisoned by the amount of alcohol in his body. So the ambulance had to come and send him to hospital, where they pumped out his stomach. And of course, he begged me, please, Pastor Sigett, please don't tell my parents. And he was so scared of the consequences. His father would pull him home and say, you come home and you don't stay in Canada anymore. So he was so scared of that. Now, if they come to Canada, even if they plan to go home, they desire to assimilate, to fit in. This is a society that's different from theirs, and they stand out and they want to fit in. So they would change themselves to fit in. And people from countries that are very conformist, like the Japanese, the East Asian cultures, Korean, Chinese, they want very much to be part of the society they live in, so they fit in. The Chinese particularly, I mean, one of the things you see in North America, the Chinese don't want to be causing trouble. They stay low key. They don't even go into politics because that's for somebody else. So they maybe the way of assimilating is to hide in the crowd. And so you need to bring them out. Excuse me. Many of them are lost and lonely, and they're listless, they're bored, they don't know what to do. And this is where you can find things to fill up their lives. And Christ, amongst other things, will fill up their lives. But not just Christ, but the things that we can teach them. Okay, so that's quite a long introduction, but I want to give you now the broad view of what we're going to do in the next sessions, 9 sessions, and today. All in, we're going to do 10 sessions, 2 hours each, and I'm going to give time for questions, and you feel free to ask. And if you have questions along the way, you have a burning question, you can stop me and I will stop, but otherwise write it down so that we can answer your questions. So 5 things that we're going to cover in 10 sessions. First of all is, why do we do this? Secondly, where do we start if I want to do this? How do we build a team? What is effective evangelism? So if you go away taking away nothing but how to be effective in evangelism, so be it. It's all good. And finally, where do we go from here? What do we do next? So this is the agenda going forward, and let's start. Over a cup of coffee, we are going to begin. And help yourself to your coffee. We are doing Zoom, so I don't see you. Maybe you can just avoid slurping so I won't hear you. Mute yourself. First of all, the biblical basis of our ministry. I've got some verses here. Go look them up. I want to specifically refer to Leviticus chapter 19, verses 33 to 34. And this is what God's word says. Verse 33, Leviticus 19. When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So God actually has a heart for strangers, and as early as Leviticus, early in the Bible, in the Old Testament, God says, you were slaves. He tells the Israelites, you were slaves in Egypt, and I freed you. You were strangers to the Egyptians, and I gave you love. I'm the Lord your God. Because I'm your God, you will do this for me. You will love the strangers. Because you yourself were a stranger, therefore you will love strangers. And because I love you, you shall show love to strangers. And Jesus even extended it to enemies, right? So you can see the motivation here. God is love, and therefore we love. God says we should remember we were strangers. We are still strangers here in this world, and so we must love strangers. And because God himself says so. Deuteronomy chapter 10 is the other passage that I want to refer to. And Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 18 to 19 is actually very familiar to some of us. Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 18 to 19. He executes, this is God, he executes justice for the fatherless and the widow, and loves the sojourner, giving him food and clothing. Love the sojourner, therefore, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. Sojourners, a word that maybe some of us don't know, it means pilgrims. We are pilgrims in the land of Egypt, and we must know we are due to go to another place, the promised land. So for us as Christians, this earth is not our home. Our home is heaven. We are sojourners, we're pilgrims here. One day we are going to be home. But while we are here, because God loves the fatherless and the widow and the stranger, we shall love them as he does. And Jesus, of course, said the same thing in Matthew 25. I was naked and you clothed me. I was in prison and you visited me. I was hungry and you fed me. And whoever you feed, the least of these of my brothers, you have fed me, basically, Jesus said in Matthew 25. So we love because we reflect the character of God, his justice, compassion, protectiveness, and because he loves. We reflect his love. And we are commanded to love the foreigner, the stranger. God sends a foreigner to us. If we look at Acts 17, God determines the boundaries of our lives and where people move in their lives. and God sends a stranger from out in India and China and Southeast Asia to us in Canada. And we need to take care of them on his behalf. And Matthew 28, of course, we know that Great Commission, we are commanded to disciple the nations. And because we have disobeyed God by not going out to the nations, God sends the nations to us. Let's not fail him this time. And we are reminded we have been there. Many of you that I'm talking to may actually even be immigrants to Canada. And Canada is such an open place. In Toronto, we are reminded that 75% of people in Toronto are born outside Canada, or they are just a second generation. 75%. So we have been there. We have been strangers in this land, and we need to take care of the strangers who come after us. We know what it's like to be lonely and lost. So foreigners are vulnerable. They get exploited. I have many times. I'm a trained lawyer. And so many of them, when they find out I'm a lawyer, they come and they seek help. And we've actually brought a case. This wasn't a student. This was actually a live-in caregiver. She came to our meetings, and then we discovered that she had been exploited and abused by her employers because she lived in. And we had to take the case to the Human Rights Tribunal. So, sometimes just things are really harsh for these people who don't know who to turn to when cheated and abused and attacked. And they're lonely. Lots of predators preying on lonely people. They are lost, they are without love, and they are bored, listless. Foreigners appreciate being helped and loved beyond the second mile. Jesus says, if someone asks you to carry their pack for a mile, we should carry it for a second mile. Essentially, he was referring to a Roman law in Palestine in his days, where a Roman soldier could call you and say, hey, you, I am tired, carry my pack, carry my sword, carry my shield, and you have an obligation to carry it for 1 mile. Okay, you cannot say no, because then you could be killed. So you walk 1 mile, and Jesus says after the first mile is gone, it's obligatory. The second mile is voluntary. Walk the second mile. Love that soldier to the point of doing the ridiculous. Yeah, why should I do it the second mile? You are an enemy to my country. You're a colonizer and you've got a sword. That's why I am scared of you. But the moment I can, I'm dropping my pack and run. Your pack and I'm running. Jesus says, no, walk a second mile. Impress this person that you are doing it out of love, not out of obligation and compulsion. These strangers are curious. They're willing to learn new things. They're easily reached. We struggle, as I said, to learn new languages and new cultures and dress like the local people, and we go and they still look at us as strangers. My church here in Singapore, we sent somebody to Japan, and they struggle for 3 years learning Japanese. And when they speak Japanese, people laugh. And I have known missionaries in Japan for 30 years, and they just have a handful of converts. Japan is a very tough place to reach people for Christ. But in Toronto, for 10 years, I had 10 believers baptized every year. And out of those 10, usually there will be at least one Japanese. And there were many Japanese who went back home saying, yes, I've believed, but they have, not been able to be baptized. They were not ready, but they go home. And some of them go home and become Christians in Japan. So it's like, as I said, the fruit is overripe. They come to Toronto and they hear the gospel and they just are so thirsty. And I have a weekly Bible study, and I have between, in its heyday, it reached even 45 students, average 20 to 25. So they're all hungry for God's word. And of course, I said they hope to fit in and they come to learn English at least, because I do my Bible studies in English, and they're trying to find out how to speak. And they think that if they listen to an English lesson, they would be far better in their um, understanding and comprehension of English. So now I want to speak about the strategic basis of our ministry. You know, sometimes they say it's good to work hard, but it's better to work smart. And strategy means, how do we work smart? The value of reaching international students for Christ is, if they stay, they enrich the local church. As I said earlier on, if they go home, they become missionaries par excellence because they have no visa requirements. If we send somebody and they get rejected and they have to come home, right? Because the visa is not given anymore. In many countries, in fact, the moment they find out you are a missionary, they send you home. They cancel your visa and they ban you, they blacklist you. You can't go back anymore. And you've got language problems, culture problems. You have to start your own networking from scratch. You have support problems because people back home in Canada, they don't send money on time. You got all kinds of health problems and things like that. But when our students go back home, they're going home. They have no problems they don't have these problems that we have. But the other thing we need to remember is, even if they don't become Christians, they will become friends for life. I was a high school student at 17 on exchange to America. They sent me to Oregon for a year. I lived with a family in Oregon. They were Christians, and I wasn't a Christian. In fact, I was raised by my father to be anti-Christian. But for 1 year, I saw Christians live their lives, and I say, this is nice. And as a non-Christian living in a Christian home, they had Bibles all over the place. I picked up the Bible one day. I read this poem. To me, it was a poem, and it was so beautiful, I memorized it. So I knew word for word Psalm 23, even before I was a Christian. So even if they don't become Christians, they are friends for life, because some of these students, they will become leaders in government, leaders in business, leaders in university, and they're going to pass on and influence what they know to others. They will be leaders. And even if they become, especially if they become policymakers and government leaders, they're going to make lives easier for Christians, or at least they won't make lives miserable for Christians, like persecution and so on. So friends for life. Can you imagine if Deng Xiaoping had gone to France and met a Christian instead of a communist? He would have changed China. It was a communist who reached out to him first, not Christians. So we have this opportunity to open closed minds, and people from closed families, they are close to Christ, closed, totally not open, right? Closed societies, closed families, closed minds. They're not going to listen back in their homelands, but in Canada, they will give you a listen. I have many stories to tell you, and at this moment, I want to tell you a story of a professor. So I don't just reach, university students. I have university professors who come. Well, there was this professor in Toronto for a year, University of Toronto. She was on a fellowship, and she, obviously being a professor, she writes papers in English, gets published, so she's competent in English, but she wasn't competent speaking English and hearing English. So she went looking for an ESL class, and she wasn't going to pay for it. I guess she was she was told there were lots of free ESL classes, English as a second language. And really God works in marvelous ways. There was a church that we worked with, and their people were out on the street corners giving not tracts, okay, not tracts, but brochures on English lessons. And she picked up one and she says, oh, okay, they do English lessons. I hate church, I hate Christians, but no, I don't care. I'm going to learn English for free. So she picked up the brochure, she went to the church address given, and she started learning English in church. Now, why did she hate church? She told us, okay, so the end of the story is within a year, just 1 year in Toronto, she came to Christ and she was baptized with her son. She had come to Toronto with her son. So both mother and child were baptized in Toronto before they went home to China. Okay, so that was China. And what happened? What changed her? She hated Christians. And the reason she hated Christians was she says, I came from a very poor family. And we were so poor that my parents gave me away. The other reason was we were farmers out in the countryside. And my parents already had 3 daughters. They wanted a son so badly, they had a 4th daughter, me. And so they gave me away, hoping to get another child that would be a son. So she says, I was given away by my parents to a family that was even poorer than we were. And she was so mad growing up that her parents, she looked at her parents, they're in the same village, they have some food, they're poor too, but they have some food. And she says, I remember eating leaves in summer because we were so hungry and we had no food, just leaves from the trees. And so she hated her parents, especially because her mother was a village pastor. So she hated Christians, really hated Christians. And she came to Canada. She went to Toronto's ESL in a church, and her mind opened up and she came to Christ. Now, what we have here is what I call a new mission paradigm. We always think we send missionaries overseas, over there, and we support them with money. And actually, you don't need to do all that. It's far cheaper for you to be reaching out to international students and people like that in Canada itself. They are coming to you. You don't need to go to them. They come to you, and they are ready to listen to you. And you don't need to learn their language. They learn your language, English, right? It's reverse. And you are home. You don't need to, sacrifice. You go to work, and then on weekends you minister to them. And after you finished your mission, you'll go back home and watch your favorite movies, HBO, Netflix, and your favorite Tim Hortons. Nothing is sacrificed. It's great. So we have 2 aspects of reverse missions. One is to look at your homeland, your home city, as a mission field. And secondly, when you send these people to their own homes, they are locals in their home, they will never lose their visas, and they will always be very effective because they speak the native language. I want to take a short break here, and you can go for your coffee, 5 minutes, and some of you may want to ask me questions if you want to do so at this time. If not, just take a 5-minute break and I will resume in 5 minutes. Okay. Right, so let's begin where we left. I'm now going to talk about what we watch out for. And remember that we are representing God, we are presenting ourselves as a reflection of God's love. So there's certain things that we need to remember as we present ourselves, as we present God's message. Now, the first thing that many of us may not realize is that we could come across as very condescending and patronizing to the people we're reaching. One of the very painful examples I've seen is, you get a Canadian and he or she is talking to a student and they try and speak very slowly. I am doing it at this speed so you can understand. Well, no, they're not that stupid, they're not that dumb, and they're not pitiful. Don't look at them with eyes of pity and say, oh, you poor person. They're not looking for charity, they're looking for dignity. So we have to be consciously thinking all the time, am I doing this so that my friend that I'm helping has dignity? So don't make it as if they're so dumb or so stupid or they're so ignorant. And they may actually be exposed to things that you've been exposed to, but they have not been exposed to, so to speak. So yeah, some of them may come from villages. They have never seen perhaps a washing machine, and you don't look at them and stare, where have you been? You don't even know how to operate this. Microwave, what do you mean? What microwave? What do? You cook with it. So I think that we need to be very careful not to be condescending and patronizing when we talk to the students. And I think it's very often we don't know how to speak, so we say a lot of silly things and then we regret what we said. So always think of this. I have one problem too, and that is I talk too much. Maybe I'm a born teacher, so I think I'm teaching everybody at the same time. So when you see somebody and you don't know what to say, the best thing is let them say what they want to say. So ask them where they come from. Okay, so tell me where you're from. Now, one thing you must not do is don't guess. Oh, you want to be, when you guess, you're trying to be clever, right? I know where you're from. You look Indian, you must be Indian. And he turns around and says, no, I'm from Africa. So you insult them. You think where they're from, and they say, no, I don't come from where you think I come from. Oh, you're Chinese. I know you're Chinese. No, I'm Tibetan. So don't guess. Ask them where they are and stop and listen to them. Don't. And when they speak, you see, one of the gifts of winning a friend and winning somebody for Christ, a friend for Christ, is to say, let them say where they come from, tell you their lives, listen to their stories. And so just stop and listen. And if they start telling you problems, listen. Many of us, I think, especially guys, we jump in and we start giving solutions. I know what to do. I'm Canadian. Well, no. I think even if you really are dying to tell them the solutions and answers to what the problems are, maybe you just write it down, listen to them first. And sometimes maybe the only problem they have is they just want somebody to listen to them. They've already solved the problem, or they have decided what to do with the problem, but they just need someone to hear them out. And the pain and the worries they have, the anxieties they have, they just want to let it go. Now, they may have poor spoken English, and try not to laugh at them, because some people react to poor broken English by mocking and teasing and joking and laughing. It's not a laughing matter for them. It's funny for you, but it's not funny for them. So I always tell people they have poor English, but the poor English beats your poor Urdu or your poor Japanese or your poor Swahili. You can't speak these things, they can. So don't laugh at them. And there is this problem that is as human as all of us breathe, right? human beings have got this maybe inbuilt fear and inbuilt sort of caution with people who are different. And so sometimes we do things or say words that are prejudicial, prejudiced, and racist, and we don't know it. So starting something like we Canadians, no, you exclude them already. We Canadians, you've excluded them, right? Uh, you're not a Christian, so you don't know this. Well, you excluded them already. Maybe they do and you don't. So why do you conclude that they don't? Just because they're not Christians, they don't know what you're talking about. And this sense of superiority, I know in your country, they don't even have toilets. Yeah, maybe even if it's true, don't say it. Because I mean, I do try and remember this myself too. I do make mistakes, but sometimes you just have to address issues very tactfully and very gently. Now, one thing we have experienced, okay, let me tell you one story. We have a lot of students come to our house, and we have built in extra toilets for them to use. And the toilets that the students use, there was one time we discovered after a Bible study, we have 20, 25 students, and then when they all leave, the toilets smell. And we have cleaned it before, and it's not about 20 people using. We realized that a lot of them, I mean, they did the business and they cleaned themselves and they threw the paper into the waste paper basket next to the toilet bowl. And we realized that in some countries, because they don't have good plumbing systems, they are taught from young, when you clean yourselves, throw your paper into the basket next to the bin, to the toilet bowl, right? Or to the squat pan, whatever you're using. They don't flush it that we do in modern countries with modern plumbing. We throw it into the toilet bowl and we flush it away. And so they don't. And so we had to say, okay, now how do we solve this problem? If we tell everybody up front, in public, they are going to be so ashamed. And many of them would say, but we do that in our country. Why are you making such a big fuss of it? So we just put a very nice notice in English, and we put a picture there and say, in Canada, we throw our tissues into the toilet bowl and we flush it. So it's just a notice there, and they probably realize, oh, so I don't throw it into the waste paper basket like I do in my own country. And so we solved the problem. After that, we didn't have any smelly toilets anymore. So sometimes I think you just have to do things in a very tactful way so that you can solve the problem. Now, the other problem is, I think many of us are proud of our own countries. I'm proud of Singapore, you're proud of Canada, and you go, gushing about how good Canada is. And maybe you came from another country and you say, I know that country was so bad, now I'm so good. Just remember that even if you did come from another country that was bad, a student listening to you may have come from the same country. And so there was this time we had a person, one of our co-workers, and I overheard a conversation. She was going so critical about the country that she had left. And she says, I'm so glad here I am in Canada. And I pulled her aside and I said, please don't do that. You may hate where you come from. These people still love it. You stop it. Okay. Now, the other thing is sometimes we try to, tell ourselves, oh, I mustn't think Canada is so great. So I'm going to be very, very excited about what they share. And so some student from Thailand, maybe up in, from North Thailand, where they eat crickets and they eat cockroaches and, dried caterpillars and so on. It's, ooh, it's so cool. and you go overboard about saying it's so cool. And these people, they realize that Canadians don't eat bugs, and they're going to feel so embarrassed that somebody is just gushing about, oh, how cool it is to. It's a kind of reverse pride. You're trying to say, I'm trying not to be proud. I'm trying to make this person feel at home, but they don't, because now they feel embarrassed that you're so loudly telling everybody that these guys eat caterpillars and crickets and grasshoppers. Now, the other thing I want to talk about is very quickly the cultures. We are going to serve people from different cultures. And one of the very interesting things I've observed in 14 years ministering in Canada and another 6 or 7 years in the US and UK. And I realized that sometimes people, even if they're immigrants, they have been away so long from their home countries, the original countries, that they no longer, they are so Canadianized, they're so Americanized, they don't understand anymore the worldviews and the cultures of the countries where they come from originally. So just beware of that. If you've been a long time in Canada, that maybe some things you're so Canadian, you no longer, you may look Chinese, for example, but you're no longer Chinese. Different cultures have got different views on sex and the appropriateness of talking about sex, or politics, the religion that we know. 3 hot topics that we try not to discuss in polite company. There is also this need for to understand hierarchies, formalities, degrees, and positions. I think I come from Singapore, where we are sort of more modernized, more westernized, and therefore less Chinese. And then to understand where, say, for example, a Korean comes from, it's a little bit more difficult, because the Koreans have got very strong sense of hierarchy. The students, we used to think of this as, in our heads. We don't say it, but it was a little interesting for us to know that Korean kids, even the students themselves, when they meet each other, they ask, how old are you? Because they need to know how old you are to address you as Oni or Hyung, or one of these titles of respect. So they need to know, even if you are 1 year older than me and you are a guy, I have to call you Hyung. Yeah. And so you're 1 year older than I'm a girl, you're a girl, I call you Uni. There are fixed rules on this back home in Korea. So they try to do that in Canada, and Canadians will go, that's my business, how old I am. You're not understanding them. They don't care about your age, actually. They just really want to know, are you older, and how much older are you than I, because I've got a different way of addressing you if you're much older than I am. So, and I think in Singapore, we do understand that a little bit, because I know some of my co-workers from Singapore, Malaysia, because I'm just, 5-10 years older than them, and they call me uncle, even though I'm not related to them, right? Because that's how we do address ourselves back in Singapore and Malaysia. So how they look at hierarchy and formalities, we have to try and understand and learn. And very interestingly, some of my Canadian co-workers, they're younger than I, they start learning to call me uncle, and my wife auntie also. It's not a Canadian thing, but they learn it. So sometimes even like things about degrees and positions, they're very conscious in their culture with these things, and we should try and understand and not poo-poo is, oh, Canadians, we don't care about what degree we have. A plumber without a degree earns more money than a professor with 10 degrees. Well, so be it. It's Canadian, but these guys care about it. So you need to just be sensitive to it. And sometimes you try, but without knowing fully, you try too hard and you end up doing making a mistake. So this is an example of one of my co-workers who was a missionary in Africa, in Cameroon, I think. And it's interesting when we're sharing about culture clashes. So, this is a very simple thing. It's getting a ride in a car. And in Singapore, I was in the military and I was in politics, so we're very conscious about sitting positions, right? So you go into a car and the person who sits at the back, that's more important person, especially the person who sits diagonally across from the driver. Okay, that's the seat of the most important person. The seat behind, that's diagonally opposite to the driver. So my friend, the Canadian, he's white Canadian, he goes to Cameroon and he realizes that, you know, they respect elderly people and people with positions. So you want to honor them even in a car sitting. So he thinks like a Canadian. He says, okay, I go into the car, I sit next to the driver. I mean, in Canada, if I am driven, I sit next to the driver. There's a seat which is important, and it makes the driver feel important that I'm sitting next to him. So here he comes to Cameroon, and he sees, he meets an elderly person, and he's a senior pastor of the church, and he decides to honor the senior pastor. When they were in a car and the driver was in the car waiting, he told the senior pastor, please take the front seat, and he took the back seat, thinking like a Canadian that the front seat, the passenger seat next to the driver, is the most important seat. Well, he says the senior pastor was very humble. He took that seat, and many weeks later, I realized I had given him the least honoring seat. He died. He basically, he says, oh no, what did I do? That's my first thing I do, and I'm so rude. So I think these are things that we, as we talk to the students, we will learn. And then instead of assuming and jumping to conclusions, we ask them, what do you do? Why you do this? And then you begin to understand that your stereotypes are all wrong. And one very important thing too is about time sense. Students from most of the world, they come from cultures where time is not important. It's not that you're not important, it's just that they don't have a time sense. So this is what these anthropologists would called a difference between a monochronic time sense and a polychronic time sense. Polychronic means time is a range. So 7 p.m. is roughly, 6:30 to 7:30, and that's 7 p.m. And in Canada, time is a point. It's monochronic. It's 1 point. That's why you say 7 p.m. sharp is a point. You don't come 1 minute before and you don't come 1 minute after. So I remember this very clearly. In Singapore, I invited the Pakistani ambassador to my home one time, and I said 7, and he arrived sharp at 7. When the clock dinged 7 o'clock, he pressed the doorbell, and he was right on time. And I said, whoa, you really punctual? And he says, I'm trained to be punctual. I'm a diplomat. And then I realized that he actually had arrived because he wasn't sure, first time to my house, he wasn't sure where my house was, so he was a bit early, and he was actually around my street at 6:45. But he didn't ring the doorbell at 6:45. He says, I am trained to ring the doorbell at 7. At 6:45, I just drive around the neighborhood till it's 7, and then I ring the bell. That's monochronic time, Western time. But in Pakistan, where he comes from, time is different. I remember being invited to a friend's house for dinner at 7 p.m. First time I was in Pakistan. I didn't know the culture. That the irony was that this guy is a friend who has been in Singapore, so he knows how Singapore is more like a monochronic place. Time is a point, 7 p.m. sharp. So I turned up at 7 p.m. sharp. He says 7 p.m. let's have dinner. And at 7 p.m., my wife and I turned up, and we were the only people around besides the host. So we said, okay, maybe we are the only guests. And then he served nuts, he served drinks, and we chatted and chatted and chatted. And then 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and people started coming in. More people started coming in, and we were still not having dinner. And my wife and I looked at each other and we thought, oh, sorry, we heard wrongly. He said, let's have maybe let's have a time together, let's have tea together. And we had dinner and we were hungry like crazy by 9 o'clock, 9 p.m. Dinner was 7 p.m. Well, at about 10 p.m., the host suddenly got up and he says, okay, dinner is ready, let's go eat. And I go, oh, I did hear rightly, but we have eaten so many peanuts, we are so full now. So later on, I asked him, I said, friend, I call him by his name, and I said, you've been to Singapore, and when we serve 7 p.m. dinner, we eat at 7 p.m. And you said 7 p.m. dinner and you ate at 10. And he looked at me very puzzled. He says, it's the same. In Singapore, 7 p.m. you eat at 7 and you finish dinner and you talk till 11. Well, here we start talking at 7 until 10 and we eat, and 11 we all go, same. Ending and starting, same. So, even somebody who's been to Singapore, he had really a problem with the culture changes. So for us who are in ISM, in the ministry, we are bridges from there to here. You come from a culture, I come from this culture, it comes from that culture, and the two are far apart. And I am your bridge to bring you from there to here and to help you understand from here to there. Let me give you another example of how cultures deal with different obligations. I once had a Japanese boy who I was mentoring, and we fixed time at 4 p.m. on Saturdays, and he would come, and he was usually on time. And one day he wasn't on time, and he did not arrive till about 6. And it was a 4 p.m. appointment, and he arrived at 6, and I was very upset. I can tell you that I was very upset, and I tried not to be upset. I said, oh, why were you so late? You could have called me and to tell me that you were not able to make it. And he was apologetic, very apologetic. And he says, well, you see, I was on my way out. I was on time as usual. And then my landlord was up there on the roof, and he says, Hero, that's not his real name. Yeah, Hero, come here. I need some help. And Hero went up and helped him on the roof. He didn't say, sorry, I have to go and see Cat at 4 p.m. So I need to go. And he had to help till the landlord says, oh, okay, it's done. And then he started coming to my place. I said, oh, no. So I told him that in Canada, if you really want to help your landlord, but you can say to your landlord, I would be pleased to help you, but sorry, I have another appointment. And I taught him this phrase, I can take a rain check. That means I said to him, you are saying to your host, it's not that I don't want to help you, but maybe another day I'll do that. Yeah. So I'll take a rain check. Or a similar situation, somebody says to this Japanese student, would you like to go to a movie? And this Japanese student says, maybe. So then this Japanese student comes to me and say, sorry, Sikia, I have this very, very persistent Canadian who keeps asking me to go to a movie. I don't want to go, and he keeps persisting. So I said, what do you say to him? I said, maybe. So I said, oh, hang on. In Canada, you are free to say no. When he says, would you like to see a movie? You don't like it, say no. No, you can say politely, no, thank you. No, thank you. Pause. No, thank you. Because I don't like this movie, or I'm not free. Just say no. Don't say maybe, because then the person keeps coming back to you because you said maybe. You haven't decided, so you will decide by and by, and he keeps coming back to you to find out whether you have decided or not. So I said, you have to learn to say no, or to say, thank you very much, I'll take a rain check. So we are bridges to help the foreigner become a friend, and a friend to other Canadians. One more thing I want to give as an example of cultural insensitivity is that sometimes in being helpful, we may be too aggressive. And I think Canadians are very good usually in this. They leave you a lot of room, a lot of space. If you say no, they go away. They are not aggressive, right? But some of us still, by nature, temperamentally and by personality, we're aggressive, a little bit more pushy than others, right? And it comes especially when we are defending our faith. And it's like, I must win this debate. I must convince this person that I'm right and he's wrong. So this must win last defender of the faith mentality, that's what I call it. We should let go of that. Never mind if our friend doesn't fully understand what it is to be a Christian, why Christ dying on the cross is not stupid, not idiotic to believe in the resurrection, things like that. We can slowly win them over, but the first thing we want them over to is not our faith, it is our friendship. So we need to be patient and not impatient. We need to do things without deceiving them. One of the things that I see very often, which I dislike very much, is to see Christians talk to a stranger and say, hey, I've got 2 questions to ask you. I'm just curious. I want to, and most people will say, oh, okay, you want to find out more about my country or me? I'm happy to answer your questions. And you say, oh, I've got 2 questions, and it will take 5 minutes, and then you go on for a long 2-hour dialogue on your faith. And I think especially you're just standing outside the door of somebody and say, I've got I need 5 minutes from you, 2 questions, and you are there for 2 hours. That's deception. That's not the way to win win people to Christ. So these are things that we sometimes can turn people off even before we begin. And therefore, I think we need to watch each other. And I am constantly also looking out for my co-workers who maybe come across as too aggressive. I had to tell a co-worker once, it is already very difficult for a student to come to church, because for them it's like a place they don't go to. And then they come to church, and then the first thing you do is to sit yourself, plunk yourself right next to them, and for the next 1 hour share with them the gospel. And all they wanted to do was to say, I'm here, I'm curious, I just want to see what's happening, and you corner me and you're not letting me go until I say yes to your gospel. And that is so insensitive. So I think we need to be very, very gracious in reaching out to our friends. And I will give a further session in future, one of my future lessons on how to be effective in evangelizing a stranger. And I have many other notes on culture. You should look at the handout. And I just want to end here and maybe give some time for questions.
Shall I stop the recording?
Yeah, sure. I think I will leave the questions unrecorded.
Mhm.